Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this afternoon's Planning and Highways Committee meeting. I'll hand over now. No, I won't. I will ask each member to say who they are. I'm Alan Woodcock, Councillor for East Ecclesfield.
Councillor Bernard Little, Walkley Green Party.
Peter Price, member for Shire Green Brightside.
Councillor Gary Weatherall, member for Shire Green Brightside.
Netherton Sharrow.
Councillor Mike Chaplin, Councillor for Southey Ward.
Councillor Dennis Chapman, member for Mosborough.
Roger Davison, Councillor for Ecclesall.
Barbara Master.
I'll now hand over to Abby for housekeeping arrangements. Abby?
Thank you, Chair. In the event of a fire alarm sounding, please take instruction from staff and stewards. The assembly point is at Tudor Square. Please can I request everyone to switch mobile devices to silent mode so as not to disturb the conduct of the meeting. The meeting today will be webcast and the recording will also be available for people to view later through the Council's website. It is also possible that Sheffield Live TV will record and rebroadcast this meeting. While the meeting is open to the public, photography, video and sound recording of the proceedings is permitted. However, the Chair has discretion to withdraw or suspend this permission, for example, if the recording is disrupting the conduct of the meeting or is being undertaken in a manner which could capture personal information, or in the event that a member of the public participating in a meeting objects to being recorded. Thank you, Chair.
Do we have any apologies for absence, Abby?
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillor Laura Moynihan.
Thank you. Exclusion of public and press. I don't think there's any items.
No items, Chair.
Do any members have any interest, declarations of interest to declare?
Just to say, Chair, that as I walked in, I recognised some members of my family, so I won't be able to take part in the discussion about 48 Brooklands Avenue.
Thank you. Item 5, minutes of previous meeting. They start on page 9. Page 9, 10, 11. Can I have a proposal, please?
Proposal, Chair.
Seconder. And site visits will go into members' diaries. I'm now going to hand over to Councillor Mike Chaplin to chair this next piece, which is the Ranfall, 15 Ranmoor Park Road, Sheffield. It's a tree preservation order. I wasn't present at the last meeting, and anyone else that wasn't at that meeting, please leave, which is Peter. And myself, we have to leave.
Chair, there's more members than that who weren't present, sorry. So there's yourself, Councillor Chapman, Councillor Price, Councillor Uller, who were not present at the last meeting.
So could those councillors please leave?
I think I was present, but I hadn't done the training, and I've since done the training, so I still do have to leave.
Only members that sat as part of the committee for the last meeting should be taking part in the second in this return. Okay. Thank you.
Chair, just for clarity, members don't have to leave the room, do they? They just have...
Yes, they do. Are we informed?
A clarification then on that.
Chair, I think there is a reference to in the Constitution to members leaving the room if there's an item that they're interested in. I believe that on this case, because it's just because you weren't present, you're not necessarily interested in the item, it's just that you're not part of the committee for this item. So I'd be content with members just sitting in the public gallery for that item. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Cheers.
Thank you, everyone. Do we need a summary from the officer on this?
Chair, it's okay, I'll introduce this item, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Victoria.
That's okay. Thank you, Chair. As members are aware, this is a decision whether to confirm a tree preservation order that started at the last committee, and following that discussion, members decided to defer the matter for a site visit. I understand that site visit occurred yesterday. In the intervening period, we have received 3 further representations which are detailed as supplementary, which members should have had before earlier, whenever it was, and now also in front of them now. If members are content to take that as read, I'm happy to just briefly summarise, or if members prefer me to read it out verbatim, I'm happy to do that.
I think we can move on.
No. Well, thank you, Chair. So just briefly.
Just taken as read.
Taken as read, thank you. So, yeah, just briefly those representations. The first one was from an object who sent it just to one committee member, and that's mainly regarding different way to prune trees, and that's been responded to by the officer. And then there's the second one is a more detailed representation about the tempo assessment. Again, that's it's been responded to again. And the third one was a shorter representation, which again has been dealt with. And just in respect to that third representation, there was a suggestion there that there would be a need to revoke the TPO if members decided not to confirm it. And just to reiterate that there's no need to put forward a motion to revoke the TPO, but if members, if the vote on the officer's recommendation is lost, a member will need to put forward a motion to not confirm the tree preservation order and go through that process, not to revoke the TPO. Thank you. I don't know if you want to ask Simon if he's got any further comments before resuming the members' questions.
Simon, do you have anything you want to add at this stage?
No, I don't think so. It's all covered in the officer's responses.
Thank you. Would Andrew Mills like to come to the speaker, please?
Is that working? Good. I'm not going to comment further on the technical arguments between the tree officer and our expert opinion sought by our residents, other than to say that the tempo assessment is intended for guidance only. And the ensuing arguments clearly demonstrate a tempo assessment is open to individual interpretation and cannot in isolation definitively justify a TPO. Tempo's author clearly states that tempo does not take any allowance for the relationship that an owner or its neighbours have with the tree. He goes on to say that such issues with owners and neighbours might well be grouped together under the heading of livability, including the relationship between the tree and any structure. It is therefore possible that a tree scoring 16, so definitely meriting a TPO, might not be included for protection reasons, unconnected with its attributes. Most importantly, the people whose lives it affects directly, financially and emotionally. The tree puts financial stress on our residents, not only the high cost of regular pruning, but also the cost of cleaning up the mess it creates. The constant need to sweep up the debris falling from the tree, jet wash paving areas to remove sap, cleaning out gutters, cleaning windows, skylights, glass verandas. The devastation caused by the tree, I'm sure, was very clear to see for those visiting the sites yesterday. The emotional stress it places on people is even greater, with the loss of light and enjoyment of valuable limited outside space. As is well known, seasonal affective disorder, SAD, significantly affects people's mood, causing depression, anxiety and stress, in the extreme leading to clinical depression affecting mental health. For some of our elderly residents, their only practical access to outside space, fresh air and sunlight are their terraces and balconies, effectively made unusable by this tree. the council, Sheffield City Council, proudly states, people are at the heart of what we do. Is this always true, I ask? I appreciate the tree officer's passion for their work. I'm passionate about my work. There are, however, two sides to consider: the rights of the tree versus the human rights of the individual residents. I would ask you all to consider the rights of the tree. Should the rights of the tree trump the rights of the people, if this is truly true that the council does take to heart and represent the people? That's really as much as I want to say on this, because I feel very, very strongly about it. All our residents feel very, very strongly about it, that it's not just about scoring points, and that never was the intent of the law. The law clearly states that TPOs should only be used to protect trees whose removal would have a significant impact on the environment and its enjoyment by the public. Enjoyment by the general public is next to zero. The tree is barely visible. Enjoyment by the public who live around it is quite the opposite. It causes massive amount of stress and anxiety, and I think it's wholly wrong that a tree preservation order should be imposed upon the private residents.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. Would you like to return to your seat?
Thank you.
I'm going to open it up to members' questions. Sorry, no, first thing I've got to do is ask officers if they want to respond to the speaker's remarks. Simon?
Yes, I will. I think a lot of it was also covered by the officers' responses in the report, mainly the issues around what's considered an ordinary nuisance, which is shading and sap and things like that, and how pruning can be used to alleviate those issues, and there's kind of room for manoeuvre in the application for the work to the tree once protected. And as it is with all issues around trees, there's a lot of guidance and grey areas because trees are very difficult to pin down and be specific about, and that's what the tempo assessment does. It leaves a lot open to the application of expert opinion and knowledge, which is what Vanessa, the tree officer, did when she applied tempo. It's not just a prescriptive thing. All her decisions were made using reasoned arguments, which I think a lot of even were agreed with by Mr. Anderson. So, yeah, it's not a prescriptive thing. You need to be an expert in trees to be able to apply it, and I believe that was applied accurately. It is an amenity assessment, so it does take into account the impact on the local environment, which does include people as well. It's not, the tree doesn't really have rights per se. It's more taking into account how the tree affects the people and the ecology of the local environment. And I think from the site visit yesterday, you could see that although it was limited visibility, which is how it was accurately assessed, it was clearly visible. And also in the conservation area assessment, it did highlight the importance of large mature trees in gardens in Ranmoor because of the lack of public space. And this is definitely, you know, the whole grounds of Ranfall are something that meets those specific things that were mentioned in the conservation area assessment. And, you know, the ultimate conclusion of this is the tree being removed and how that would leave a large hole in that green space and would have a large impact on the environment. Yeah, I think that's all of it, really.
Thank you, Simon. I'm going to open it up to members' questions, and I see Roger's hand up, so you can go first.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I do apologise I wasn't able to come yesterday, but I have looked at this. There are a couple of questions, really. One, how long does the TPO last? It's not indefinite, is it? That's the first question.
It is indefinite. Well, it's as long as the tree is there, it is protected. I mean, the confirmation period is 6 months, so if it's not confirmed, then it's no longer in effect. But once it's confirmed, then that is there as long as the tree is there.
And the second question is concerning the pruning of a tree. How often would the tree need to be pruned to be, you know, in reasonable condition and not blocking the light of the residents.
The pruning, as stated in the officer's responses, the pruning of the tree is a separate matter to whether the tree should be protected or not. And the government guidance does not request that or require us to take into account the future management of the tree. It's whether it is expedient in the interest of amenity to protect the tree now. Once it is protected, then the tree managers or owners may apply as many times as they want with any specifications as to how they would like to prune the tree. And if they don't agree with our decision on that, then there's a whole separate appeal to the planning inspectorate. They have already applied to prune the tree, and we have, approved that pruning, so that can already go ahead.
I believe that that permission is free. Is it granted free?
Yes, all of the kind of TPO application process is completely free. The appeal process is free, so yeah, that's quite straightforward.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd just like some agreement confirmed that consent is granted on the 7th of March to prune the tree by 30%, which is a reduction of 30% of its leaf volume and 12% of the overall branch length. Has that happened? And will such a pruning mean that the tree won't really need to be touched for another 10 years, about approximately?
Is it up to me? Please?
Do you
Well, I can use my knowledge to kind of, yeah. So yeah, the 30% has been approved, and that was specified by the tree owners. We didn't, we can't dictate that. That was something that's just applied for and approved. In terms of 10 years, I'd say with a tree of this size and at this life stage, I would say it's definitely, if we're talking 12%, it's approximately a 25-metre tree, so you're looking at a 3-metre reduction all the way around, so 50, so that's kind of a 6-metre if you're looking at both sides. So the time it would take a tree to put on 3 metres of regrowth, you're looking at 5 to 10 years, I would say.
Okay, thank you for your comments, Andrew. Next, go to Cliff Woodcraft.
Thank you, Chair. Can you confirm, have any representations of the first question been received in favour of the TPO from neighbours?
I don't believe so.
No, okay, thank you. And the second question, and I think I know your answer to this, I think you've probably already given a response, but I'll ask it slightly differently. And that is, if the TPO was granted, there's absolutely no guarantee that you could give that that tree, that the owners of the tree would be allowed to manage it in a particular way that would enable them to resolve the current problem. In other words, if they wanted to pollard it or that, there's no guarantee you can give. If you give that, if we grant that TPO, then we just don't know what the outcome could be. I think
I know what you mean, yeah. But going back to my previous point, it's not relevant to the argument of whether it's in the overriding thing is, from the government guidance, is it in the interest of amenity to protect the tree? It doesn't, that's kind of a whole separate process, separate government guidance, a separate part of the Planning Act, everything deals with that. And when it comes to that, there is, as I said, there is a separate route to, so when the decisions are made on whether pruning work can be done, we use the British standard, which was compiled by experts and people throughout the field as recommendations for what pruning specifications should be applied. But there's also lots of other information that goes in there in terms of the species response to different types of pruning and, what the purpose for the pruning is. And so there's lots and lots of factors that go into the decision on what kind of pruning is allowed and what isn't, and also how that impacts the amenity value of the tree. And then if the applicant isn't happy with the response, then they can go to the independent party, which is the planning inspectorate, and that can be, that can be resolved in that manner. So there's always a separate route to go through with that.
Thank you for that, Simon.
Thank you. Yeah, so, I mean, just to clarify, I mean, if we granted the TPO, it would be like signing a blank cheque. Would that be correct to say? We just don't know what the outcome's going to be.
I think that's a bit of a stretch here, Cliff. I've not heard you make that argument in relation to other TPOs.
Yeah, it's not a blank cheque. There still needs to be the whole process that we go, we don't make decisions based on sticking our fingers in the air. They are fully justified and arboriculturally sound decisions that are generally accepted throughout the industry. It's not a case of just being belligerent or something. It is a fully considered decision.
Yes, Victoria.
Thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate that point, really, that confirming the TPO would mean that I'm sure I turned that off once. Did it turn off? No. Typical. If the TPO is confirmed, that will bring the management of the tree under control, such that an application will need to be made to the authority, which would then be determined. And if the applicant was unhappy with that, as Simon says, it could then go to the planning inspectorate, who would look at it independently. The alternative for members is if they don't confirm the tree preservation order, they will be able to remove the tree. So they're the parameters that you're working within. It's whether you want to control the future of the tree because it's expedient in the interest of meeting to do so, or whether you don't want to do that and you want the owners of the tree to be able to remove it. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Barbara, you had a question.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, really, yeah, it's a very sort of divisive thing, this, for all sorts of reasons, but I'm looking at 2.15 on page 17, and it's the description of a minor inconvenience. Now, I have a feeling I know what you're going to say, but time and time again, that has been mentioned to me in all sorts of avenues. So can you sort of be a bit more specific about what is a minor inconvenience as opposed to an actionable nuisance? Thank you.
So the difference between actionable nuisance and ordinary nuisance, which I think is what's being referred to here, is defined by law, as it says in the responses, that ordinary nuisances are things like shade, honeydew, and other things. And in case law or in any other circumstances, there's no requirement to work on trees or prune or fell trees because of ordinary nuisance. And that's also reiterated by the guidance on when people apply to work on a TPO tree, is it only talks about actionable nuisance and not ordinary nuisance, which are seasonal nuisances such as the things mentioned. So really it's a very separate thing, the difference between the two types of nuisance, and that is defined in the Act.
Is there a grey area in between?
I would say no, personally, because the trouble is the precedent that is then set if you allow trees to be felled or pruned because of something that's very subjective, which is shade and leaf litter and other things like that. Then once you allow it for one tree, then you then allow every tree that ever produces leaves and they end up in a gutter to then require pruning or felling. So I think it's very important that consistency is set upon these decisions when it comes to working on trees with ordinary nuisance issues.
Thank you, Simon. I'm sorry, Andrew, but you had your time to address us. This is not open to the public. This is now between councillors and officers. Tony Downing.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I did go on the site visit yesterday and saw this tree, fine specimen, I must admit. What I'm concerned about, and it's something that the officer has just touched on, and that is if we allow or if we go against the officer's recommendation, what precedent would that set? And I believe you've just said that. And that would be my worry, because there are lots of trees in the city which fall under a TPO. And once we've done one, for to a healthy tree, which is what it is and what I saw yesterday, how far can that go?
I think you were straying into comments there, but I think there was a question in there for you, Simon.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you can look at how you would apply the tempo valuation to just the other trees in the garden, I guess. I guess because of the lack of the public green spaces, as mentioned in the conservation area assessment, the visibility on a lot of these large trees is limited. So a lot of the trees within that garden would score the same. Now, if the scoring were to be adjusted to be consistent with this tree and it not actually be valid to have a TPO put on it, then it would include all the trees in that garden would not meet the criteria for a tree TPO, as well as many of the other surrounding trees. That said, there's nothing, it has significance within Ranmoor because of that limited visibility part, and it is a nice tree, but there are lots of nice trees there. But yeah, as I said, it's that once you can't protect that tree, then there's lots of other trees that you wouldn't be able to protect.
Victoria?
Thank you, Chair. Just to remind members that it's either expedient in the interests of amenity to protect this tree, or it's not. And that is something that you will be able to decide on a case-by-case basis for each tree. In terms of making that determination, you are to take into consideration any objections, but you take those objections into consideration, and how that influences your decision as to whether it's expedient in the interests of amenity to protect this tree. So obviously each tree is going to have a different, amenity values, different considerations, and each one needs to be taken on its merits. So in terms of a precedent, you are looking at this one tree and whether it's, the amenity of the tree means that you should protect it or not.
Thank you, Victoria. Gary, do you have a question?
Yes, thanks, Chair. At the last meeting, cost kept bringing up from residents when they were speaking. And then, we were going for a site visit because a few members weren't happy with the officer's recommendation. Do we take cost into consideration for the residents when we've got a TPO on it?
Thank you, Chair. Just to go back a little bit on that comment, the meeting previously was deferred for a site visit because some members felt that they would like to see the tree, presumably in order to determine whether it's expedient in the interest of the community, whether to protect it. There was a discussion about costs at the previous meeting. I think that related a lot to the difference between the 30% reduction and whether that translates into a 12% branch reduction. So there was that discussion. Just to remind members that what prompted the TPO was a request to remove the tree. So we're not arguing or discussing or considering, is it the 30% that application referred to, or the 12% that was consented to. The alternative here is the removal of the tree, and that's why the TPO was made. In respect of costs of managing trees going forward, I believe that is something that has been raised as part of an objection. So in terms of considering the objections and the fact that they related to the management of the tree, yes, you take into consideration there. Nevertheless, you're being asked today, is it expedient in the interest of amenity to protect this tree? And in doing so, you need to be considering that wording. In terms of the costs and the management of a tree, that, to my mind, wouldn't necessarily impact whether it's expedient in the interest of amenity, whether or not to protect the tree. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. If there are no more questions, yes, it is a question, isn't it? Because I think members want to move to comments now.
Has the extent of the shade cast by this tree been measured?
Is that relevant?
Sorry, Chair. It's the question has been raised here about the problem of the shade, and I want to know if this has been actually measured, because this has been raised as a reason to object to the TPO. So it's a question to the tree officer whether the shade has been measured.
I think it's going to come back that it's not relevant to the issuing of a TPO, but I'll hand over to Simon.
Yeah, that's correct. It comes under, as I said before, ordinary nuisance, and really it's whether it's expedient in the interest of amenity, if the tree's loss would have that significant impact on the amenity of the area. The kind of shading issue would be a separate issue for applications to prune.
Thank you very much.
Can I thank you for that answer, Simon? Can I invite members to make comments now, as we've gone through questions?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm very torn by this. I mean, I love trees. We've got lovely lots of trees in Sheffield. And this tree was already there when the building was put up, so they knew about it. On the other hand, when I saw it, there was considerable overshadowing. I mean, if you look at the picture that was in the pack here, it was taken in winter. When I was there yesterday, the overshadowing was considerable, and I was impressed that it had quite a significant effect, and I can understand people not wanting it. The other comment I would make is that this tree is significantly larger, it seemed to me. I mean, I've not measured it, than other trees in the area. And so in a sense, it kind of stands on its own as being a bit of a nuisance from that perspective, from the overshadowing point of view. I think for these reasons, I'm going to end up voting against it, against the TPO.
Are there any other comments from members? Tony?
Yeah, I know it's probably not relevant, but across the city we have all these issues all the time about trees and not being pruned and one thing and another, and work not being done. Unfortunately, this situation is not good. I understand that, and I sympathise with the people that are living there. But I do believe that if we go against the officer recommendation, we would set a precedent, and then tree protection orders then would be very difficult to defend in the future. So with that in mind, I'm going to vote for the officer recommendation to keep the TPO. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tony. Bernard?
I shall be voting for the TPO, for the retention of the TPO, on the grounds that this is part of wildlife habitat. The tree in itself is a habitat. It's not sort of separate from anything. And so in which in itself the tree is important. And it's the end of a line of existing trees, therefore a wildlife corridor. I will therefore be voting for the TPO, having read through the report from the officer. I feel all the concerns that have been raised have been addressed. Thank you.
Barbara?
Yeah, with great reluctance, I'll be voting for, and it's simply because with the answer you gave to minor inconvenience, straight away I envisaged a tree in a situation where I would love it to be removed, a lime tree, because of precisely these conditions. So it's a particular location, and I'm thinking straight away, oh, I could use that. And if I think that way, then other people will as well. And I think for protecting the trees in our city, I can understand the rationale behind this, so I will be reluctantly voting for it.
Thank you, Barbara. I'll just make a few comments. I felt we benefited from the site visit yesterday, those of us that went. And particularly when you stood back on, I think it was on the roads around it, it was much more prominent than I was led to believe. It is a mature tree, but it's certainly visible from the pavements of those roads nearest this property. I have trees in my garden and they shed leaf litter and I have to say I feel it's something that comes with the territory. Over my side of the city we don't have nearly enough trees, and this is set in a suburb which does have a lot of trees and a lot of gardens, and so along with Barbara and Tony I will be supporting the officer's recommendation today. Are there any more comments?
Just move to a vote, Chair.
Okay, so we will move to a vote. I'm going to start with Bernard.
I support the recommendation to have a TPO.
Thank you.
Supporting the recommendation of the officers, Chair.
Tony?
Support the recommendation to retain the TPO.
Tilting the balance, I will go in favour of the TPO.
Barbara?
In favour of the TPO.
Cliff?
Against the TPO.
And lastly, I'm in favour of the TPO. Thank you. I will now hand back to Councillor Alan Woodcock.
Papers.
What you lost?
Everything. It's taken everything.
The chair's note for you.
That's it, yes. Thank you. We now move to applications of various acts and regulations. We have three to hear today. The first item 8A, which is planning application number 23/00198 FUL 45A Brooklands Avenue, Sheffield. It's page 29 of the agenda. This is yours, Sarah, I believe.
Thank you, Chair. So this application relates to the demolition of a dwelling house and the erection of 4 detached dwelling houses on land at 45A Brooklands Avenue. This slide is an aerial view of the site. From there you can see the access, which is between 2 dwellings on Brooklands Avenue, numbers 45 and 47. It's a narrow access which currently provides access to the single detached dwelling that you can see on the site there. The site is very green and there are trees around the boundaries. To the east of the site, the trees there are protected by a tree preservation order, and there is one further tree to the west of the access which has an individual TPO on it as well. This is the site location plan, so you can see the layout of the site and the relationship with surrounding properties, and the area in green is the area covered by the TPO. This slide is a view looking up the site access. Number 45 is to the left of the screen and number 47 is to the right-hand side of the screen. This is another view taken from further along the site access road. Again, you can see number 47 to the right-hand side of the screen there. This is another view from the access, but taken looking the other way towards the highway at Brooklands Avenue and towards the rear of the houses on Brooklands Avenue. This is an image taken from the northwest of the site, looking towards the existing property, and you can see that it's a detached bungalow-style property with rooms in the roof space. You can see in the background of the picture there's a line of trees along the eastern boundary, and those are the trees that are subject to the TPO. This is a view towards the rear of the site. You can see the bungalow towards the left-hand side of the screen, and you can see properties on School Green Lane in the background. This is an image looking at the side elevation of the dwelling, looking east. Again, you can just see sort of the tops of the trees, which are covered by the TPO in the background there. The left-hand photograph here shows a view towards the southern boundary. The trees to the left-hand side of the picture are the TPO trees, as are the trees further to the right as well. And then the image on the right-hand side is taken from within the site, looking up the site access. Some more images of the TPO trees along the eastern boundary. This is the site layout, proposed site layout. So from there you can see the site access to the north, and you can see 4 detached dwellings located in a east-west axis across the centre of the site. The trees around the site are shown in red, and the root protection areas are shown in the red hatched lines there. The dwellings have gardens to the rear and garages and parking spaces to the north to the front. These are site sections through the site going from east to west. You can just make out a red line on the screen there, and that shows the existing site levels. So at the moment there's a fairly steep drop across the site, and it's proposed to sort of level that out somewhat so that the gradient is more gently sloping. There is a fall from west to east, and the dwellings sort of reflect that fall. The top section here is taken from the front of the site along Brooklands Avenue, and you can see in the foreground the dwellings along Brooklands Avenue, and you can see you can make out plot 1 and 2 in particular in the background, and that shows the levels and the relationships of heights of the properties. And then the 2 further sections there are taken on a north-south access through the site, and you can see on the second site slide there, you can see the properties on School Green Lane to the south. The top section here shows is a section through the site access with the properties on Brooklands Crescent to the right-hand side and the proposed dwellings to the left-hand side. And then the lower images are sections which show the dwellings to the rear of the site. These are the elevations and floor plans of the dwellings. So this is plot 1. The properties are proposed to be constructed of stone with pitched tiled roofs and large areas of glazing. They're predominantly 2 stories with some accommodation in the roof. And the properties are all 5-bedroom dwelling houses. This is the dwelling on plot 2, which is a largely similar design to the previous one, as are the dwellings on plot 3 and plot 4. So I'm going to go back to the site layout plan to discuss the key issues. So the site is located within a housing area. The principle of residential development is acceptable. This application for 4 dwellings follows the refusal of a previous application in 2022 for 5 dwellings on the site, and that was refused on the basis of design, amenity and biodiversity issues. There have been 31 objections to the current scheme and 6 letters of support. In terms of design, the reduction in number of properties from 5 to 4 means that there's more space between the dwellings, which is viewed positively. The properties are not particularly visible from outside the site, and there are a variety of properties within the surrounding area, and so the design is considered to be acceptable. The trees shown to be retained around the edges of the site are shown with a hatched marking. That's most of the trees to be retained, and all of the TPO trees proposed to be retained. There are a few trees to the south of the site at the rear of plot 3 which are proposed to be retained, but there is a landscaping scheme which shows replacement planting around the site. Although the dwellings are not located within the root protection area of the trees, they are very close to it, and as you could see from the images, those trees are very large, and there could be potential conflict between the trees and any residential properties on the site. In terms of ecology, a preliminary ecological assessment was submitted along with a bat and a badger survey. There are no protected species on the site. The information showed that there will be a net loss in biodiversity. However, the applicant has offered to enter into a financial agreement to secure off-site enhancements to biodiversity. In terms of amenity, adequate separation distances exist between dwellings in the surrounding area to ensure that there wouldn't be any overbearing or overshadowing issues. There wouldn't be direct overlooking, but owing to the scale of the property, the scale of the dwellings, there would be a perception of overlooking, particularly to garden areas. The key area of concern relates to the intensification of the use of the site access. As can be seen in the photographs, the site access is located in very close proximity to dwellings on either side. And it's considered that the increased use of that by 4 times the existing use will significantly increase noise and disturbance to residents by virtue of residents having to pass in close proximity to the sides of those dwellings. That brings, in addition to that, there'll be headlights from vehicles passing along that access, and the access would need to be lit in order to be safe for pedestrian access. The use of the driveways to the front of the site and that vehicle area to the front of the site will also result in increased noise and disturbance and headlights to that area, which will impact negatively on the quiet enjoyment of the garden areas. As was visible from the photographs, first floor windows of the dwellings on Brooklands Avenue were visible from the site access, particularly due to the level differences. And those windows are also visible from the site entrances and where the driveway would be, and so there'd be increased overlooking from those areas and from the vehicle movements and people using that access to the rear of existing properties. It is proposed to put acoustic fencing along the sides of the access, but this wouldn't completely block out sound. It would only be effective to ground floor level, and where there's a direct line of sight, for example, from the windows, it wouldn't offer any mitigation. The effectiveness of the fence would also reduce the further away from the fence, so further into the garden areas, the effect of it would be reduced. In terms of the access itself, it's not ideal owing to its narrow width and its length. However, the applicant has submitted information that shows that 2 small cars can pass side by side along that access point. There will be increased difficulty with larger vehicles. So in summary, when applying the tilted balance, the proposal is finely balanced. However, officers consider that the adverse impact to the amenities of neighbours by virtue of the intensification of the site access do not outweigh the benefits of the scheme. And in line with previous recommendations, a development for 2 to 3 dwellings would be considered to be more appropriate. Oh, sorry, I'll just draw attention to a supplementary report. I think you should all have got a copy of that. Essentially, there's been another representation since the officer report was published. That was from a neighbour raising concerns that some of the land adjacent to number 47 wasn't within the ownership of the applicant. This has been investigated previously, and the applicant did state that they own all of the land within the red line boundary as shown. Aside from this, land ownership is a private legal matter, and it's not considered that this matter has any further bearing upon the officer recommendation.
Thank you, Sarah. We have a number of speakers, and the first speaker is Sue Alston, please. You have 5 minutes, Sue. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm here as one of the ward councillors for the area. I have had regular contact from anxious neighbours concerned about development on this site since the first proposal was put forward in 2020. And I'm here to support them and the officer recommendation and ask the committee to refuse permission for this development. This development represents a definite overdevelopment of this site. It was previously, as you've seen, one bungalow. The end houses, if built according to the plan, will be completely next to the boundary. There are basically too many buildings on this site for this location. They would have a significant effect on the privacy and perceived privacy of the neighbours around, overlooking gardens and windows. Residents' disturbance, as pointed out by the officer's report, of general noise, light nuisance, and vehicle movement noise. One of the major concerns, as has been mentioned, is the access and vehicle movement. Although there are 2 spaces officially for cars, 2 cars per house, we all know that very few people use their garages to park their cars in anymore. And houses of this size, in my experience, and I'm sure in many of your experiences, often have 3 or more cars, and they don't tend to be the smallest cars either. The inevitable effect of that is that the people who lived in these properties would park on the road, thereby increasing the risk of a hazard for using the entrance. The driveway itself is long. In reality, I wouldn't want to pass another car on that road. I think it's very much only 1 car wide, and I do know that pathway very well. It is certainly inadequate for the vehicle movements associated with 4 5-bedroom properties. If 1 car met another, one of them would need to reverse, leading to further danger to pedestrians on the highway, especially if visibility was further impeded by parked vehicles. I wouldn't feel safe walking along that driveway, and therefore I don't think other children, for example, or older people who can't move quickly should be put in the position of feeling unsafe. And as has been pointed out, if it was lit, it would produce additional light nuisances to neighbouring properties. There's also a question about emergency access and access sufficient for a refuse vehicle. The fact that private collection of refuse is being considered probably says something about the access to this site. My final point, Chair, is around damage to the trees and the consequent reduction in habitat for birds and bees. Birds and bats. You'll note that one house, as been pointed out, is actually very close to those trees with the TPOs on, and they can very easily be damaged by it. And indeed, the other house is very close to the other side. Some of the vegetation on the site has already been removed, and I know that the local residents are very keen that that should not be further reduced. So to conclude, Chair, I'm asking the committee to refuse this application alongside the planning officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Next speaker is John Hartley, please. You have 5 minutes, John.
I'm a neighbour to this development and happen to have been a member of the Landscape Institute for over 40 years. I don't intend to embarrass anyone, but would like to raise what I believe are relevant objections which seem to have been forgotten during the evolution of the proposed plans. I also intend to highlight what appears to be misleading information which has been produced for this application. My main objections are provision for parking and access, size and style of development, the recent solution of an acoustic fence to the boundary, habitat loss, and precedents given in the local area that are not like this development. The property, when bought by the current owner, was empty but well maintained. All neighbours have lived with this as a house and garden, and most would not object to a reasonable development proposal. Since buying, the owner has cut down most of the trees, removed various parts of the building, and has left doors and windows open. There are around 20 properties adjoining this site, and contrary to comments on the application, no one has seen or raised any concern over antisocial behaviour. My main point then are these are 5 up to 6 bedroom houses, if you want to rearrange things a little bit internally, and have only 1 external parking place each. I submit that this is not sustainable. Properties of this size could expect to need space for at least 2 cars and probably more, perhaps a recreational vehicle. The drive is 47 metres long, and pedestrians and cyclists, which are sustainable transport, will need a safe passage when meeting oncoming vehicles. As other visitors, such as grocery deliveries, plumbers, friends, relations, fire engines, so they've not been catered for. The drive, even though widened, does not meet the recommended 4.9 metre width, and the measurements given by this applicant involve the cutting down of the hedge for 45 Brooklands Avenue, which is in the ownership of number 45. The drive, even though widened, as I mentioned that, some vehicles will have to reverse one way or the other, and what will happen on Brooklands Avenue when a vehicle is reversing onto the hill and another is trying to enter. Bear in mind that there is a drive immediately on either side of this entrance as you approach, and there are other drives opposite. Point 2, the size and style of the development. Basically, this is a string of detached houses, 3 floors high really, with 5 to 6 bedrooms and a roof line at right angles to many of the existing houses. This is in the midst of a neighbouring homes of 3 to 4 beds, 2 stories, sometimes with a room in the roof. There has been no response to the setting of the closest properties which would be affected, namely a barn and a farm, which date back to 1680. These consist of a collection of various stone wall buildings finishing at just 1 floor high in the rear, with small windows and a stone slate set of roofs. How would a wall, in effect 3 floors high, of mainly glass facing these buildings at close proximity and at a higher elevation show sensitivity to their setting? The reality and perception of being overlooked will be extreme. In sections 3 in the submission, there's only a vague indication of the height difference between the two. This loss of privacy would be true for many other properties bordering the land, especially the 2 along the full length of the access. Surrounding properties will be negatively affected by light pollution. Point 3, the ideas of an acoustic fence recently added aims to reduce sound for the neighbours, is proposed for the site boundary. To build one of these alongside the hedge belonging to number 45 Brooklands Avenue with a suitable retaining element for the drive will further reduce the width of the drive. How will this fence look against the barn and farm, and how will it work against the fences and hedges of existing settled properties? That's my question. Point 4, habitat loss. Because the proposed development is profoundly more than the existing dormer bungalow, there would be considerable habitat loss, which would be increased by the erection of an acoustic fence cutting out free passage of badgers, foxes and hedgehogs. The one listed tree that I spotted is the pine tree. It's noted to have surface roots, and the roadway cuts round and will certainly cut into the root plate, which could make it unstable. The gardens are so small that they're likely to be decked, paved or covered in plastic grass, further reducing habitat and increasing water runoff. How is water runoff to be dealt with? What about sewage disposal? How would that work in the low-lying plot?
John, you have 5 minutes, thank you.
Okay. I've just got one more point, which is about precedents, which don't really relate to this site and the number of properties. Thank you.
Thank you, John. We have 2 speakers for the application, the first being James Hinchcliffe, please. You have 5 minutes, James, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity. Apologies from my wife, she can't make it today, she's got patients. Yes, I just wanted to say we've taken on board a lot of the things that the neighbours have said. We went in for an application for 5, which was turned down. A lot of the reasons I took on board and I accepted. I think they made some very, very good points and some things that actually were overlooked. When I was on site with the planning officer, the lady involved, she said, we would much prefer it if you went for 4. We feel 4 would be much better to fit on the site. Taking on board the neighbours' comments and that comment from the local planner, we went back to the drawing board and came up with the 4 houses. To rebut one of the comments earlier was about number of cars. Now, we actually want to live on this site, so my wife and family wish to live on this site. So again, we want to try and work with our neighbours because we want to be one of those neighbours. Now, we have a family of, there's 2 kids, there's 4 of us. Yes, it'll be a 5-bedroom house. We've only got 2 cars. We'd be looking to, hopefully one of our parents might be having to move in with us as they're a bit dependent. So there's an assumption that just because there's a 5-bedroom house, that means there's going to be 4 cars, which is nonsense in our, with the way we would be using it. Also, just looking at Forward, and Forward's got about circa 20,000 residents. If you go on Rightmove today, there are 3 houses available which have 5 bedrooms. Speaking to a lot of people that I know in the locality, because I've lived in Forward for over 20 years, there aren't the exact homes that they want to bring their families up in. If you look at all the houses even around the site, everybody's gone up into the dormers to create more space. So I just think that it's crying out for more homes, more exact homes. This is an affluent area in Forward. I think everybody knows that this is an area that needs to be developed. I want to work with everybody, including yourselves and the locals, to make sure that this is a quality development. As like I said, we want to live there. We want to look to probably plant even more trees. The acoustic fence is just one thing. One of the other things we've been looking at is noise reduction asphalt. You can get asphalt that includes rubber, which reduces the sound by 50 up to 90%. We also, oh, that's about it actually. That's me done. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Our next speaker is Susan Crowley, please. Again, Susan, you have 5
James, as the applicant, is just making some handouts. We've already had this agreed with your legal team, if you don't mind. I'll refer to them in the presentation. Thank you, Chair and members. Officers have provided a detailed report for your consideration, and I'm aware that some of you actually visited the site yesterday, so I know you all understand the broader context. From our reading of the officers' report, we can see that they agree the local planning authority doesn't currently have a 5-year supply of housing, and that the tilted balance applies. I'm sure you're all versed in that. And more importantly, perhaps, we know that there is no objection to the principle of developing the site for housing or to the design of the dwellings on grounds of loss of or impact on trees, on grounds the dwellings cannot be served by an adequate amount of amenity space, which officers agree is in excess of the standard required. There's no objection to the provision of off-site biodiversity compensation, or on the grounds the dwellings will be overbearing for or result in light loss to adjoining residents, or on highway safety grounds, and that's an important point. In addition, officers agree that the dwellings, in terms of their siting, observe sufficient separation distances from neighbouring properties in all cases. Focusing then on the reason for refusal, and there is just one, we note that it's justified on the following grounds: noise disturbance, light disturbance, and loss of amenity and privacy to adjacent properties and gardens. And the officers have been very, very clear in making it distinct where that noise and disturbance will occur, how it will occur, and it's specifically due to the close proximity of the development to neighbouring properties and the intensification of the use of the narrow access. On the first matter, close proximity to neighbouring properties, officers concerned in this regard, and we've looked at the report, are confined to the matter of plot 2 overlooking the garden to 14 School Green Lane, since it is only plot 2 that has a direct relationship with 14 School Green Lane, and on the potential for users of the access to overlook gardens either side of it. To clarify, for your information, plot 2 will sit 17 metres from the boundary with number 14 at its nearest, and at its furthest 19 metres from the boundary. The existing dwelling sits a further 5 metres forward in the site of plot 2. Noting the level of screening that exists along the boundary and taking into consideration the fact that the applicant will be willing to erect a solid boundary 2.1 metres in height to supplement existing screening with 14, officers cannot be concerned about overlooking of the garden to number 14 from ground floor within plot 2 or from within the garden to plot 2. It must also be the case that officers cannot be concerned about overlooking of number 14's garden from second floor accommodation within plot 2 because second floor accommodation within plot 2 is served by roof lights. So it must only be the case that officers are concerned that residents within plot 2 may overlook the adjoining property, number 14, which is 19 metres away, the boundary to number 14, from openings at first floor level, which at present currently number 2. 2 openings serving 2 bedrooms on 1 property. We would ask members to consider whether such a relationship is out of the ordinary, but regardless, the applicant will be willing to set the sill height of those openings to eye level or to obscure the glazing in part to prevent any such overlooking. On the second matter, that of noise and disturbance and loss of privacy to properties either side of the access, again, to reassure members, the applicant is willing to secure the boundaries with an acoustically attenuated boundary reaching 2.1 metres in height, which members must agree would adequately prevent any overlooking. Officers acknowledge this, but then proceed to make the judgment on the matter of disturbance by way of noise, stating that any such boundary treatment would not be effective, since noise can travel upwards. The applicant notes the local authority's own environmental health officer has not placed an objection on file to this application, and the applicant themselves offered to appoint a noise expert to the matter of designing the acoustic fence and with a view to providing data to offer reassurance to officers on the matter of being able to attenuate the noise generated by movement along the drive. This offer was declined. So in the absence of any expert opinion on the matter or an objection from environmental health and noise and disturbance, members are asked to consider whether officers are entitled to arrive at the judgment they have, particularly when weighing in the balance the recent appeal decision on the property 270 Handsworth Road, which turned on the same concerns and which has been allowed. Regardless, we've presented members with 5 examples, we would state precedents, of residential schemes in Sheffield that are of a similar nature to the scheme at Brooklands Avenue, where housing development has been approved on garden land or greenfield sites served by an access between 2 existing residential properties, and where the matter of the intensification of the use of an access and impact on neighbouring amenity, by way of loss of privacy, noise and disturbance was not considered material. We would remind members of their duty to be consistent in their decision making. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Susan. Sarah, would you like to respond, please?
Thank you, Chair. Just a few points to note. Reference was made during comments there that we had suggested that 4 dwellings would be acceptable, but it should be noted that we've been very consistent in pre-application advice and in a directive on the previously refused application that 2 to 3 houses would be more suitable for the site, given the issues that are in question. In terms of overlooking, the officer report does suggest that direct overlooking will not occur, but there will be an increased perception of overlooking given the scale of the dwellings. And also there's the increased overlooking from the increased use of the site access and the area to the front of the properties. We did receive some comments from EPS during the course of the application. They made reference to the fact that a fence wouldn't completely mitigate noise from the access, and that the fence would only be effective to the ground floor and not to windows above. Nevertheless, it's officers' professional opinion that the increased use of that site access will cause unacceptable noise and disturbance. In terms of the examples that have been given there, each case is determined on its own merits, and none of them are directly comparable to what we've got here.
Thank you, Sarah. Members' questions? Roger?
Thank you, Chair. What is the actual width of the road, the access?
It varies between 3.9 and 4.4 metres.
What is the size? Have you any idea what the size of an emergency vehicle is, such as a fire engine?
I'll pass this to Helen.
Chair, a fire appliance needs 3.7 metres in width, where they're working alongside the fire appliance, 3.2 metres through something like a gate. So the maximum width required as part of the regulations is 3.7 metres.
Thanks, Helen. Any more questions?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Well, Barbion Road, I weren't going to ask this question because I know it's going to get reduced anyway, but when you brought that up and there's going to be this new fencing going down, if they can't take the boundary fence down, the property owns that, the person who owns that land won't let them take it down, how much is that going to reduce that?
Sarah?
I believe that there's a fence already on the side with number 47, and I guess that could be replaced with an acoustic fence. That wouldn't affect the width. In terms of the relationship with the other property, there is a hedge obviously on the boundary there, but that's set within the boundary of number 45, and the plans indicate that the fence would be along the edge of the boundary. So it's difficult to say exactly, but I would suspect it wouldn't have much of an impact.
Tony?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. How did you come to the decision between 5, 4 and 3 on size-wise? Is it the size of the houses or on that particular plot?
Well, obviously we're looking at things on their own merit. So the previously refused application for 5, along with the noise and disturbance issues, there were other issues as well. So there was sort of overdevelopment / design sort of reason for refusal as well. The reduction in the number has kind of addressed that design overdevelopment issue in terms of the appearance of the site. But it's still considered when considering the number of vehicle trips and the amount of noise and disturbance and activity and light associated with 4, that it still seems excessive in comparison to one house, and it just tips into being unacceptable. Whereas if it was 3 and you're reducing the movements again by 25%, obviously the site with the principle of residential development is acceptable, and so something could be done with the site, and it's just finding that right place where development would be acceptable and wouldn't have the negative impacts. And our advice has been that 2 to 3 would be more suitable.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Did you work proactively with the applicant to find compromise?
We have had pre-application discussions on the site previously. I believe it was a different applicant and a different agent, and I don't believe that this applicant has submitted pre-app, although I'm getting a shaking head. But we have expressed the issues previously in relation to the previous scheme. The application was submitted to try and address those issues, but unfortunately it hasn't considered to be enough.
Okay. I'm sorry, but you've had your time. Thank you. Tony?
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask, what would an acceptable access look like for a development of this size? What width would there be? Footway?
I think that's a question for you, Helen.
Thanks, Chair. We're not saying that the access is unacceptable in terms of a highway perspective. It meets the minimum guidance that we have in the South Yorkshire Residential Design Guide, which ultimately is based on the manual for streets. As I say, for a fire appliance, 3.7 metres would be what is required. The only slight area of concern that I have is actually at the junction of the access with the main road and the turning manoeuvre there for a larger vehicle. But as I say, from a highway safety perspective, we have many shared accesses which accommodate more dwellings than this. The access wouldn't be adopted, it would be a private street, if you want to call it that. But from a highway safety perspective, we're not saying that the access isn't appropriate. Thank you, Chair.
Do we have any more questions? Barbara?
Yeah, I think it's a concern. I mean, again, it is the access for bins, and I look at the parking, and I'm thinking that's inadequate parking if you're having bin lorries. So I know that there was a comment that it's going to be a private bin collection, but I'm thinking you can't guarantee, there's no guarantees that these conditions will be maintained in the future, and there's no limit to how many cars can access those buildings, and there's no limit to how many cars for that site can actually park on the road. Now, I'm very concerned that it's also a very sloping site. Doesn't that, the access is on quite a steep bit of the road. Does that affect it? Because there seems to be a lot of negatives about accessing the site, which seemed to be borne out yesterday by the visit.
Chair, in terms of the sight lines at the site access, they meet the necessary requirements, again, of the South Yorkshire Design Guide and Manual for Streets. That's in terms of vehicles exiting, if you like, and seeing vehicles side by side. Where there is the slight issue is that we can't achieve pedestrian vehicle intervisibility split because that land is actually at either side. That is obviously desirable, but is not always included, but is preferable from a safety perspective. And say that the details of the access, yes, they are on the, shall we say, the minimum side, but they do meet the guidance that we have, which would mean that refusal on highway grounds would be inappropriate.
But for a refuse lorry, would the bins be brought out to the road, which would obviously cause sort of congestion, or would a vehicle be expected to reverse into the site and collect the bins from there? I mean, I'm thinking about the amenity value for the actual residents of that site.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, obviously, I can't speak for a private collection, bin collection, but I certainly know that the council's collection invariably do not go onto private drives. They will collect from the side of the road. Thanks, Chair.
Bernard?
Thank you, Chair. Are there any local plans that community plans that might impact on this development, and have they been consulted? I'm thinking in terms of one place in Sheffield, in this area, there's the Be Best plan, local plan. Just wondering if there's anything local that's been referred to.
Sarah?
There aren't any neighbourhood plans that cover this area.
Any further questions? No. Comments, please. Your hand was first, Tony.
Yeah, I mean, I take cognizance of the amount of properties that's proposed to be on the site, which seems to be slightly overdevelopment. But I'm mainly concerned about this driveway, as there's no way that that can be widened at all, because there's properties very close to either side. Now, if that roadway could have been widened, which it can't, obviously it can't, that might have had a different impact on it. But as it stands, with the driveway as it is, and the overdevelopment from to 4, I still think that, and I'm minded to go with the officer recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Mike?
Thank you, Chair. I'm minded to agree with Councillor Downing here. There's also no net gain in biodiversity with this site, which would become a possibility if the number of homes was reduced to 3, as the officers recommend. And I do think there are concerns about that quite long, narrow access route for people walking, who will on occasions need to walk through. Also at the entrance, with vehicles coming and going, even if it's only 2 cars per household, it does mean that people have to access that route very carefully. And certainly the driver of our minibus yesterday, for those of us who were on the site visit, he had to go along that route carefully to make sure that his vehicle, which is probably wider than all but 4x4 vehicles, to make sure it didn't scrape against the side of the fence. So I'm minded to support the officer recommendation, but I'm sure an applicant will come back at a future date with an application for the right number of homes in that space. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Peter?
Thanks, Chair. It's clearly a site ripe for development, but I must admit, I just think that 4 detached properties is detrimental to the character of the area. It's one too many in my view, and I think it does represent overcrowding. The chances of only having 2 vehicles per property are very slim. My experience is that my wife has a car and kids have one, if not but 2 kids, and the chances are there'll be several cars per property in future. We must take that into account, because as the other speakers have said, you can't widen that drive. I just think it's overdevelopment, and knocking one out would make it far more pleasanter to live there, far more acceptable to the neighbours, and hopefully give the investor the return they're looking for. So I'm going to support the officer recommendation. It does need developing, but on balance, I think it does, overcrowding, in my view, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Cliff?
Yes, at the risk of repeating all that's gone before, I mean, I totally agree with the objections. It's too crowded. Access is narrow. I won't go into all the detail again. I just don't think it's appropriate. Thank you.
Yeah, it is a comment about the comparators that we've been given, because some of us have actually sat on the planning applications for some of these, and we know very well that the circumstances for 2 particular ones are very different to here. So it's just to reassure the applicants that in fact we are familiar with different kinds of access, and it's not just on a whim. We've actually considered the matter in quite a few cases, and I'm mindful to support the officer recommendation.
Thank you, Bernard.
Yes, my concerns are loss of habitat in this particular space, as made clear in the presentations, and the increase of traffic and congestion in the area. We've already seen so many of our roads with cars parked bumper to bumper. It makes it very difficult to access the sites safely. I'm very clear that this is overdevelopment, and I will be supporting the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard.
Thank you, Chair. I also agree with Councillor Peter Price that the site is ripe for development. However, I support our officers' view that it is overdevelopment. I think it is a tipping point. I would support a scheme that would have 3 dwellings on this plot. Thank you.
Thank you, Evie. As chair, I rarely comment, but I have to agree with the members that this is probably overdevelopment, and the access to the site is quite bad. So I will vote this time, and I will vote with the officer's recommendation. So I think we will now move to the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Just during those comments, quite a few members have mentioned the word overdevelopment. I just want to remind members of the wording of the reason for refusal that's in the report, which doesn't actually mention overdevelopment. So if you want to take advice from officers on overdevelopment as an additional reason prior to going to the vote, then that's something that members could consider. Thank you.
Mike?
Would loss of amenity to the neighbours, be it the residents living round about, be acceptable?
Thank you.
If members want to familiarise themselves with page 29 of the report, where the officer has set out what they believe the right reason for refusing is there, I would suggest that members take the time to look at that, decide whether they're happy to agree that or whether they want to take officer advice on additional or different reasons. Thank you.
So, as members, are we going to go with the officer's recommendation and wording?
Yes, Chair.
Sarah?
So we did one of the reasons for refusal last time related to overdevelopment and design. So I wonder if we could add overdevelopment into this reason for refusal. So just add a little bit of wording which expresses the concerns about overdevelopment as well. We could weave it in there.
That's acceptable, Vicky?
If somebody wants to put forward a motion which is seconded and then voted on to delegate some additional wording into that reason, which includes overdevelopment, then I don't have a problem with that. Thank you.
So, Mike?
Happy to do that, Chair.
And Cliff seconds that. Can I take a vote on that, please? Yep. That's passed, thank you. So I'll start with you, Bernard, please.
Just to clarify that you're voting on the officer's recommendation, which would be now updated with that additional overdevelopment wording in it. Thank you.
Bernard?
I should be supporting the officer's recommendations for the update of overdevelopment.
For the officer recommendation, Chair.
Gary?
Yes, Chair, for the officer's recommendation.
Tony?
For the officer's recommendation, Chair.
Ivy?
In favour of the officer's recommendations.
Mike?
For the officer recommendation as amended.
Ditto. For the recommendation, the officer's recommendation with the amendment.
Barbara?
For the officer recommendation and amendment.
Cliff?
For the officer recommendation and the amendment. Thank you, Chair.
And I'll vote for the officer's recommendation with the amendment. So that motion is passed.
Chair, can I request a comfort break?
Please. Yeah, it's 1:30, so can we have back for 22? Yeah, 10 minutes. Okay. Didn't realise until such time as he started to speak. I perhaps would have declared that I knew them, but it would have no bearing whatsoever on my decisions I made. I haven't seen that person for over 7 years, but I've known them for over 20 years. So it would have no bearing whatsoever on my decision. But I had to declare that because, as I say, I didn't realise it was them. I didn't know their second name, otherwise I may have picked it up from the... So, thank you, members. Right. Our next application is item 8B, planning application 22/04490, FUL, Woodhouse, Trinity Methodist Church, Chapel Street, Woodhouse. Chris? No, Bernie?
Could we just have some clarification? There seems to be it seems like we're repeating the same application on 8A, 8B and 8C. Is that correct? I just want to make sure we're voting on the right thing.
Chris?
Thank you, Chair. There's actually two applications being considered here. One is the full application, the one with FUL after it, which is at the bottom, top of page 49. That's the full planning permission. And then the second item, I hope I've got that the right way around, is the LBC, which is listed building consent, which is on page 69. There's one report that starts on page 49, including the recommendation, but the actual report starts on page 52 that covers both items.
Thank you.
Over to you, Chris, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this application, or these two applications, relate to Woodhouse Trinity Methodist Church, which is on Chapel Street in the centre of Woodhouse. You can see there on the map. It's the church building itself, which covers one half of the site on the eastern side. Its grounds to the western side. There's an aerial view there. You can see the large building opposite is the co-op. So there's a mixed character in the area. Some buildings of a similar era to the church, but also some modern introductions as well. The building is Grade 2 listed. It's been vacant for approximately 10 years. The congregation having moved next door to the building that you can see there immediately to the east. The building is Grade 2 listed, as I say. Its interior is of particularly good quality and remarkably intact, given the length of time that it's been vacant without any intervening use since the church stopped using it. These are just some images of the interior. You can see there, as I say, it is remarkably intact. That's not to say there aren't issues with the interior. There's a number of pigeons which inhabit the building. There are some rot issues as well. So it is beginning to deteriorate. But as I say, a lot of the features are very much still there, including pews, organ, vestibule, the ceiling decorations, etc. A number of stained glass windows, both on the front and on the sides. This is a view of the, obviously taking wind to this, of the yard area or the grounds area which is to the west of the church, which is there on the left. The building in the centre of the picture, the gable there, is a two-storey domestic property which fronts Tannery Street. You can just see the cars there on the right-hand side. They are on Tannery Street. You can also see a boundary wall there, which runs around the whole of the site and with railings to the frontage. This is the site plan as existing, and you can see the detailing on the church building there, and the whole building to the north, which is now currently used by the congregation. The proposal is to convert the building to 8 apartments. That's 1 studio on the ground floor, 3 one-bedroom units on the ground floor, and 4 two-bedroom units on a first and second or mezzanine floor. That will involve the removal of most of the internal features to facilitate the change. As you can see here, these are the features as drawn, and then the image there shows, because of the interventions needed to provide 8 units, a large number of those would disappear. That's not to say all disappear. Some are retained, and we list those within the report, but they're limited mainly to the entrance lobby, partial staircases, the cast iron pillars, which you saw on this image somewhere here, they're retained, and some of the wall decorations. Externally, there's some loss of stained glass windows, mainly on the side elevations, but others are retained, and other windows are restored and repaired or replaced. There's a proposal to provide 8 car parking spaces within the area that is to the west of the church, in other words, within the church grounds. You can see there an access is created off Tannery Street, which is actually a no-through road with a turning head at the end. There are 2 bin and bicycle stores, one on the northern side of the building in an existing lean-to, and a new structure proposed in the kind of top right-hand corner of the car park area. So in terms of the images available, that's the total of them. The application, as you'll see from the report, produced a lot of response, a lot of people speaking in support of the application, writing in support of the application, a 95 signature petition, and then of 13 individual representations, 8 supported and 4 objected. And given the recommendation is to refuse, that's the reason that we're at committee today. Those objections, that support centres around very much a desire to see the building reused as part of the community, and the benefits that the community feel that would bring. The provision of the 2 1 and 2 bedroom housing units are also seen as important within the area. Those in opposition, along with Historical England and the amenity bodies, are concerned with the impact on the interior, the loss of the interior, and the windows, and an expression of concern about the impact on the external space, both physically in terms of appearance and in terms of impact on any undiscovered archaeology within the grounds. The principle of the use as housing is acceptable in the unitary development plan. It's identified as a housing area, so clearly housing is a preferred use. The emerging plan, which has limited weight, identifies the area as an expansion of the district shopping centre or the district centre, where commercial uses and community uses are preferred, but it equally doesn't rule out residential. So in either scenario, residential is supported. The key issues then is in the main, the impact on the interior of the listed building, but the impact on the significance of the heritage asset, especially the interior, which forms a large part of the building's significance, and also the potential for archaeological interest in the grounds. The changes are extensive, and they result in, we feel, a loss of legibility of the internal space and internal features. And we also feel that the car park will be harmful to the setting of the building. In such a scenario where there's what we consider to be significant harm to a heritage asset, then there is the MPPF makes clear that there is a need for substantial public benefit to outweigh that harm. And whilst we acknowledge that there is public benefit in providing 8 new residential units, obviously at a time where we have a shortage and the tilted balance is in play, there is investment in the area through construction and resident spend once the building is occupied and the building gets reused and it improves its external appearance, notwithstanding the concerns about the car park. They're all good public benefits, but we don't feel are substantial enough to overcome the significant harm that would accrue. Paragraph 201 of the MPPF is particularly important here, in that it fails that test, the test in paragraph 201, if the benefits don't outweigh the harm, unless, and then there are four particular categories which are relevant, and they are that the asset in its form prevents all reasonable uses, and the policy requirement, the national policy requirement requires all of these four to be achieved, it's not an either or. So that as I say, the asset prevents all reasonable uses, that no viable use in the medium term can be found through marketing, that grant funding or public ownership isn't possible, and again, that the harm or loss is outweighed by the benefit of bringing the building back into use. And we don't feel those points have been demonstrated. In terms of the archaeological potential or value in the site, we feel that's in the grounds, or the potential exists for it to be in the grounds, and it hasn't been explored, and neither do we have sufficient reassurance that the works that are proposed to it won't be harmful to it, and you know, that irrevocable damage would be caused. So we don't feel that issue has been demonstrated. And overall consider that there's an unjustified harm to the listed building and its setting that isn't outweighed by benefits, and that there's a lack of information being submitted that is required to address matters such as the archaeological interest. There is some additional information for me to refer to, which is within the supplementary information. It's a little lengthy, this, but I'll try and keep it short. So there is an omission within the report. I've just referred to paragraph 201 of the MPPF, but paragraph 200 should also be mentioned, which states that harm to the significance of a designated heritage asset requires clear and convincing justification, and that substantial harm to grade 2 listed buildings should be exceptional. So in this case, we consider that the applicant hasn't provided clear and convincing justification for the harm, or demonstrated that the substantial harm is exceptional. And that provides further rationale, therefore, for the recommendation to refuse the application. Since the publication of the officer report, the applicant has submitted a viability appraisal, which seeks to demonstrate that the proposed 8-unit scheme represents a reasonable level of profit, and that a conversion with less units wouldn't achieve that. We got that information on the 13th, so we're at the 18th now, so very few working days between then and now. We did, however, contact our retained independent valuer to understand what kind of timescale would be involved in assessing that information, and also whether the level of information provided was sufficient to come to any kind of conclusion on that. We understand it would be several weeks before an answer could be given on the outcome of the appraisal, the recommendations and conclusions of the appraisal, but that there probably is enough information within it to come to a view on the content of the report. But that means that there wasn't sufficient time to progress that and bring a comment or an affecting of our recommendation back to you today. It does, as I say, seem to partially address one of the 3 reasons that we're recommending the applications refused for. So that would mean that even if it had been received in sufficient time to allow examination of its findings, and if they were found to be correct and we agreed with them, it still wouldn't provide all the necessary information needed to justify the level of harm. For example, going back to the comments made about paragraph 200, it might deal with one part of one of those tests, but it has to meet all 4, and we don't have information on the others. So further time to consider that submission wouldn't have therefore changed the officer recommendation to refuse the applications. We've had additional representations too in the last couple of days. One is from Clive Betts MP, who's a Member of Parliament for Sheffield South East, and raises the points listed there, which is highlighting the local community's desire for the building to be occupied, feels that residential use is the only viable option, highlights the need to preserve the external and internal elements of the listed building, and was questioning some aspects of the rationale followed by the now submitted viability appraisal. Councillor Alison Norris has submitted the following statement, which she requested was presented to committee in full. I can read that out, Chair, if you wish me to do that, or whether you're happy for it to be there printed and me to quickly summarise it.
Now, I think members have got a copy, Chris, so...
Right. Okay, thank you. So essentially what that in a nutshell is acknowledging the need for the harm to be outweighed by benefit, but arguing that the benefit is greater than officers are acknowledging. So as you say, you've seen the content of it. As I say, it's printed here in full. I think what my only comment would be the comment at the end that we most of the points raised in both that representation and the Clive Betts representation have been covered within the report, and we do acknowledge the wider public benefits of the reuse of the building in a couple of areas within the report, but we'd reiterate that those benefits could be achieved by alternative uses, and also some of the actions taken aren't fully justified. So we don't feel that those representations change the overall office recommendation for refusal, which is, to summarise quickly, is on 3 grounds. One, that the near total removal of the interior and excessive degree of subdivision detracts from the special architectural and historic interest of the church, and insufficient information has been provided to justify that level of harm, such as it conflicts with local and national policy. Secondly, that the hard surfacing of the church for car parking and the ancillary buildings associated that would harm the setting of the listed building, and insufficient information has been provided to justify that level of harm. And thirdly, that there's the potential for a harmful effect on buried archaeology in the parcel of land to the west. And again, not an appropriate level of information has been provided to assess the likelihood or magnitude of that harm. That's it, Chair. Sorry, that was quite lengthy.
Thank you, Chris. We have 2 speakers in support of this application. The first one is Laura Holland, please.
Thank you, Chair.
5 minutes, Laura.
Thank you. My name is Laura Holland. I'm from DLP Planning, and I'd like to speak on behalf of the applicant in support of the proposals and therefore against officer recommendation to refuse the applications. In a previous appeal for 12 apartments, the proposals were refused based on excessive subdivision leading to unsatisfactory living conditions due to overlooking a lack of natural daylight and poor outlook and detraction from the architectural and historic interest of the church. Pre-application advice was sought in April 2022 following the withdrawal of a previous application for 8 apartments. This advice confirmed that 8 units was acceptable in principle, but the number of bedrooms should be significantly reduced. This has now been undertaken. A reduction in the size of the mezzanine floor was needed, not total removal, and this has also been undertaken. The ceiling should be visible and exposed where possible. The removal of the pews was considered acceptable in principle, and there was no objection to the car park, but a less formal car park was suggested. The current application addresses these previous points by reducing the number of apartments by 1/3, a further reduction in bedroom numbers by half to reduce the level of subdivision and create open plan living space. The previous 2nd floor that bisected the windows has been removed. The proposed mezzanine has been reduced further. New windows overlooking the adjacent properties and the new entrance to the southwest elevation has been removed. The original windows on the front elevation and the gateway and railings will be retained. The original ceiling, decorative corbels, plasterwork and steel columns are all retained. Matchboarding on the ground floor will be retained and panelling from the balcony and the pews will be reused in the 1st floor apartments. A new home has been found for the vandalised organ. Additional soft landscaping is proposed to enhance the appearance of the car park, and headstones will remain against the garden wall. DLP were instructed to prepare a heritage statement which undertook an assessment of the significance of the building, and we advised the applicant with regard to further amendments to the original submitted scheme. It was concluded that the proposals amounted to less than substantial harm, and it was necessary to weigh the public benefits of the scheme against this harm. The Conservation Officer has drawn a different conclusion and considers that the proposals amount to substantial harm. The fundamental concern is with the subdivision of the internal space and the inclusion of a mezzanine. We have recently met with Historic England, and there appeared to be general acceptance of the matters raised, other than the loss of openness internally. Historic England suggested a scheme of 4 units could be acceptable, subject to being viable. Since this meeting, the applicant has undertaken a viability appraisal based on 8, 6 and 4 units. This was submitted on the 11th of July, and we request the Council accept this as part of the application. The appraisal concludes that anything less than 8 apartments and the removal of the mezzanine would be unviable. The surveyor also concludes that notwithstanding the impact on viability, if the mezzanine is omitted, the floor-to-ceiling heights in the first floor units would be 5 to 6 metres high, which could render these units unsaleable. Subdivision for 4 units would still have to effectively box in bedroom and bathroom spaces and would still lose the overall openness of the space. We disagree that the proposed car park will impact upon the setting of the building. The appeal inspector also considered that the garden was suitable for a car park, subject to soft landscaping. There was also no objection to the car park during the pre-application stage. There is no evidence that the garden was once a graveyard, and the adjacent Methodist church themselves have no burial records, and in any event, the excavation required to install the car park is unlikely to cause disturbance to any buried remains. The amendments have made significant changes to lessen the harm. Although removing some original features, the less than substantial harm to the significance of the building is outweighed by the public benefit of bringing the building back into a viable use. The proposals will respectfully restore the heritage value of the building, and any lost fabric will be adequately recorded. The proposals will continue to contribute a modest addition to the housing land supply within the city. The best solution is to find the optimum viable use. The building has been vacant since 2009, and no other users have expressed any willingness to take on the building. This lack of interest and the viability appraisal demonstrate that this proposal is the optimum viable use and will save the building. We therefore respectfully request that the committee members approve the proposals.
Thank you, Laura. Next speaker is Sue Howard. Thank you, Sue. We have 5 minutes.
Dear Planning Committee members, my name is Suzanne Howarth. I am here today as the Secretary and nominated Speaker for the Woodhouse Improvement Association. Before the pandemic, I was given the opportunity to move to Woodhouse. As a child, I grew up in Hackenthorpe, Woodhouse's neighbour. So when moving here, with my childhood memories in tow, along with my own 2 children, I was excited to do so. However, as the years pass, situations crop up that remind me that memories are just that. There is no place for them to exist in the present anymore. Much like the one church member's decision many years ago to get his beloved religious building immortalised with a much too heavily restricted Grade 2 listing. I cannot imagine for 1 second that that man would not regret his choices if he was stood here today in our community's shoes. To see his beloved building vandalised and slowly decaying whilst trapped in a battle between owner and planning committee. Whilst living in Woodhouse, I have got to know the community by just being a resident myself, volunteering in a local charity shop, and most importantly, spending a large amount of time talking with the community about their opinions of the building. I can assure you, everyone just wants this building in use again. Nobody cares about what happens internally. We care about the look of the building from the outside. We care that the increase in antisocial behaviour poses a massive risk to the building if kept empty any longer. On the very rare occasion I have encountered someone against the building being used again, their opinion has been based on nothing more than fear-mongering rumours. Once you spend time with these people and dispel the rumours, they agree themselves it would be great for the building to be occupied day and night with flats and looking good externally. As the years pass, the community becomes more sick of the building in its entirety. More worryingly so, the anger grows. The disdain and the disrespect increases. Terrifying sentences come out of people's mouths about what they would do to solve this problem. Today, I am asking the Planning Committee to take into account the risk of leaving this building in limbo any longer. Make this time the time to allow the applicant to get the ball rolling in a manner he sees as financially viable. The applicant has agreed to reduce the amount of flats by a third of what he originally asked for. The applicant has also found a new home for the vandalised organ. The applicant has removed the plan for windows to overlook neighbouring properties. The applicant agreed to keep the original ceiling, decorative corbels, plasterwork, columns, matchboarding. He has even agreed to reuse the panelling from the balcony and the pews in the design for the first floor flats.
Susan, thank you. 5 minutes up now, thank you. Thank you very much. Would you like to respond, Chris?
Thank you, Chair. I think just a couple of points, really, because in terms of Laura Holland's comments, I think that yes, there is a difference of opinion about the extent of harm and the extent of public benefit, which are the two key things in consideration here. As Laura said, that the heritage statement considered it less than substantial. Our conservation officers consider it substantial, and we don't see the extent of merit in the public benefits. Not that they aren't benefits, we acknowledge that, that perhaps they do. The pre-application advice, I'll just touch on very briefly. Yes, that did comment on an 8-unit scheme and suggest that, in principle, 8 units might be acceptable. But as you can see in the report, we've referenced that. I've actually lost that page now. But we refer to the need to involve effectively less intervention, less internal subdivision and what have you. And we don't think that's gone far enough, Chair, or being justified in the way that we've talked about before in respect of viability, etc. And we just don't feel that that's gone far enough. And I think another benefit we've got now, if we can call it that, in terms of the current planning application, is we've got a full-blown heritage statement and the input of the statutory consultees such as Historic England, which have fed into that consideration of both significance and the level of harm that we didn't have at pre-application stage. In terms of the comments made by Sue Howarth, I think I understand entirely the sentiment and the expression that people in the community want to see the building reused, as do we. And it may be that the community is less concerned about the interior of the building, but we've got a duty to protect the heritage asset that's based in law, further advanced in the guidance that we refer to in the National Planning Policy Framework. And that requires us to understand the significance of the building before making a decision on any alterations to it. And a very significant part of the significance, I shouldn't use that word, is its interior. So we have to have regard for it, and we can't just kind of set it aside in favour of achieving some use of the building without the correct justification, and that's what we're that's the issue that we face and the problem that we've got, and we've concluded that we don't have that at this stage, and we would also ideally like to see much less in the way of intervention. I think that's all I can say, Chair.
Thanks, Chris. I'll open now to questions. I have Tony, followed by Glynis.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I went on the site visit yesterday, had a good look at this building, a Victorian building, I understand, and it is falling apart. In light of the vandalism that takes place in Woodhouse, I do know of that because I live quite close. I feel that it would be good to bring that building back into use. In terms of the archaeology, the interior of the building, one of the speakers has said that all the stuff in that building would be retained, and the pews and etc. would be used for within the individual flats. What I want to ask is, what weight can we give to the car park with its, because it's on a burial ground, I understand. Yeah, that's the question I want to ask.
Chris?
Chair, just to comment first of all on the retained features in the interior of the building, that there is very little of it retained. There will be, as you can see from that image there, which is the, in fact I'll start with the before. So this is the arrangement of the interior of the building, and I mean, before going further, I should say, you know, we accept that it's, if the building is going to be converted into residential units, that particular layout as it stands at the moment doesn't work particularly well. So there would be the need for alteration and intervention. That's acceptable, but it's about the extent of it and how much of that is justified by the need for that level of accommodation. So I think what the speaker was saying in terms of retaining features was that some of the panelling, some of the features themselves are being retained. So a portion of the lobby, for example, you can see there is not significantly affected. A section of the staircase is also retained on either side of the entrance. The features around the outside edge of the building on the second floor would be retained, albeit with the odd element of subdivision within them, by setting in and creating that sort of mezzanine area there, which you can just make out hopefully on the middle image, on the kind of middle row on the right. But there are a very significant number of the features that are lost, many more than are retained, and I think what the speaker was referring to was that some of the panelling would be reused in an imaginative way in the fitting out the formation of the apartments, but you know, not kind of in its current location in its original form. So just to kind of clarify on that. In terms of what weight can be given to the potential harm to archaeology, again a significant amount, because it falls within the National Planning Policy Framework that identifies the need to understand the significance of assets, which includes buried archaeology. We feel that there is there's I won't go as far as to say dispute or disagreement, but there's a suggestion that there's nothing there. That's not our understanding. Amenity societies, their records suggest there may well be something there, burial grounds potentially. And that needs to be properly understood, both in terms of the potential and the works that would need to take place to the car park area to construct it, to understand its impact. And the national policy, we feel, is quite clear that we shouldn't proceed until we've resolved that issue. So I would say we would have to give that significant weight, Chair.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah. Could the development not go ahead without the car park being put there? I know that would probably impact on the residential areas for parking, but would that not work?
Thanks, Chair.
Chair, it is a possibility that, yeah, I think it's fair to say as officers we would prefer to see a much reduced car parking scheme to enhance because there's a second reason that ties in with this, which relates to the setting of the listed building. So it would very much be our preference to reduce the car parking provision from that perspective. Helen might have a view on the highways considerations, and we would have to consider that as is normal, where you have sometimes potentially conflicting ambitions within policy. We'd have to weigh that in the balance and come to a view on what the most appropriate outcome was. But yes, it's possible for a reduced car parking scheme, and depending on the number of units involved, again, something that we would have to discuss with our highways colleagues, and a scheme with no car parking that would then result in no intervention in those grounds other than maintenance and restoration, perhaps. But that's not here for us to kind of discuss now. We don't have that proposal in front of us.
Thanks, Chris. Grace?
Yeah, I also went on the visit yesterday, and I'm a past resident of Woodhouse. In fact, I was pointing out loads of things to all the visitors yesterday. We did notice that in that, where the car park is, there are 2 gravestones still standing. One dated 1847, prior to the actual when the building was built. So there must be something archaeological in that bit of car park. There must be something there. And one gravestone upright, but we couldn't see the date on it because of everything that was surrounding it. And that must have been prior to that. So really old things in that car park area.
Did you have a question, Glynis?
Yeah, I wanted to know is, can we actually pass this knowing that there ought to be more information got about the car park? We can't just, as I think Tony said, just pass one part and not the other. So.
Okay,
Mike?
do you want me to answer that? It's a similar answer to the one before. Our view is no. We shouldn't be supporting it in the absence of that being fully examined and resolved.
Mike?
Thank you, Chair. I think all the members here would like to see this site developed. The problem we have is that this is a Grade 2 listed building, and with that comes certain limits and responsibilities on what we can do. Would it be possible, I'm not saying, and I am concerned that with the report and the way it's set out, it is rather leading us to rejecting this application, but I just wonder if in future, would it be possible to put in a number of conditions. One is that we insist on a survey of the land next to this building to see what archaeological evidence there is for a burial ground and anything else for that matter, because we know that prior to this church being built, or chapel, one was built in around 1815 So there'll be the remains of that, I would imagine, or some remains on site, knowing the way these things go with archaeology. And the second one is to put conditions on how the internal fabric of the building is used. It's a big shame for us members that went on the site visit yesterday. We could see the grandeur of the outside of the building, particularly the front, and the way it's quite imposing on the street scene. But we could not get to see inside, to see the panelling and the other decoration that had gone into the interior work of the church. And I just wondered if that could be secured by condition, if not now, or whether it could be considered for a future application, so that the applicants know what they have to do before bringing it to committee. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, I think if we were in a situation where the level of harm and intervention was fully justified, then it's possible that those items as a kind of a topic heading, if you like, may be able to be conditioned. You'll have dealt with, I've seen many applications where we've recommended archaeological watching briefs, etc., while work's carried out, for example, or a very stringent condition requiring a large level of detail of alterations to internal fabric. That would come if we were in a position of being able to support the application in principle. But we're not at that stage, we don't feel. We've got the very much kind of in principle concern that the harm to the interior, well, first of all, the interior is very much part of the significance. The harm is too significant, too substantial. And that we don't feel that that's outweighed by the level of public benefit or being demonstrated to be necessary at this stage in terms of the valuability appraisal and those other factors within paragraph 201, around its level of consideration of alternative uses, for example, and evidence of marketing for those, etc. So that we're not at that stage yet, but yes, in the longer term, it is possible that the detail of those items could be conditioned were we to be satisfied on the principle at a later date.
Thanks, Chris. Cliff.
Thank you, Chair. Can you clarify, please, with regard to the archaeology, whether it's a requirement to excavate or just to protect it so that it can be discovered in future generations?
The requirement is to understand it, first of all, so it would be a question of a desktop study to start with, along with, I would suggest, probably a greater level of information as to the extent of excavation, aligned with that understanding that comes from the desktop appraisal. When a watching brief occurs on site, that's when excavation is undertaken, and that usually follows at the next stage, such that, for example, if we were satisfied with the information provided and we were proceeding overall to recommendation for approval, then there'd be a condition requiring sometimes a further layer of information to be provided, and also a watching brief on site while or a written scheme of investigation to understand while the development is taking place what is happening.
Thanks, Chris. Bernard.
At what point does the building become delisted as a Grade 2 historic listed building if this development were to go ahead as it stands?
I would think it highly unlikely that the building would be delisted in its current form. That's a matter for Historic England, particularly who are responsible for listing buildings. But as buildings change over time, either through permitted alterations or through other acts such as fire, etc., things can be delisted, but that's a completely separate process that we're not necessarily party to.
Thank you.
Peter?
Yeah, thanks. Presumably the archaeology and the grave has nothing to do with the listing. That's a separate issue, presumably. The listing's about the building and internal requirements. Plus the fact it will not be the first graveyard that's been gone under car parking. We dig a king up from under a car park a few years ago. Anyway, that's by the way. The reason I'm worried, Chair, it's been empty now for 10 years, and it's clearly deteriorating as years go by, and vandalism is going to get worse, I guess, as time goes on. And there's been nothing happen, and I just don't know where we go from here if we turn this down. In your comments, it says it wouldn't prevent a conversion to a number of less harmful alternative uses. What alternative uses? It's been 10 years and nothing's come up yet. I just despair. I've seen a list of buildings in the city that's got that far bad. All we've retained is one wall because to save something. And I just wondered, are we not in danger of letting this go too far? Because if we can't come up with anything in 10 years, what's going to happen in the next 10 years?
Chair, I think that kind of falls into the area of the demonstration of the lack of viable uses, and we haven't had that other than the kind of point that Councillor Price is making, that it's been vacant for a large number of years, and almost something would have happened with it if it was going to happen now. But there's no evidence of a sustained period of marketing for particular kinds of uses, for example, which is required by, I think it's Part B of paragraph 201. That's the kind of information we would expect to see submitted as evidence that the building has been marketed at a reasonable price for particular kinds of uses for a particular period, and that nothing's come forward. And that would all feed into the justification that is currently missing. But without that, following the national guidance, we don't feel we can support the application.
Thank you. Shouldn't officers be suggesting alternatives? If officers think there's alternatives, then you should say so. Or somebody else can dream some up.
Chair, I think we have, without sort of specifying a proposal or a particular use, we've acknowledged that residential is an acceptable use, and we've also acknowledged that other uses such as community uses, which I know are less profitable, but again that's another strand of the MPPF suggestions, and other uses which require less subdivision. So that could be it could be leisure activities, it could be other entertainment uses, for example. Many historic buildings of this nature are converted to that kind of use, but no, we haven't actually gone to them and specified a particular use.
Gary?
Well, there's going to be some comments in this, Chair. There will be a question, but I'm struggling, really. It's a shame we just can't say we'll freeze this application and officers and developers go away and come back. We can't do that, I know that. I know it's go on.
Thank you, Chair. Just on that, obviously it is members could put forward a motion to defer and for a particular reason and ask something to happen for them to officers come back with an update. So there is that. So yeah, certainly not put it on ice as such. But if members thought that there was some aspect that they wanted to be further looked into before making a decision, they could defer for that basis.
I'm glad you've helped me out. I will propose, but the thing is, in Greniside where I live, we've had, in 2005, the old school buildings got planning permission to get turned into flats and one thing and another. And I've been going past it for last, who knows how long. And about 4 months ago, I got in touch with planning officers, enforcement, said it's one of the buildings is collapsing, roof's all caving in, get it sorted out or we're going to lose it. And guess what? We lost it. The demolishers went in and it's flattened now, so we've lost a part of a lovely building. So we're not protected the outside, we're not protected the inside because it's gone. So that's why I really want to defer this so officers can go back, talk to developers and say what is their concerns about the graveyard, if it is a graveyard, wherever the piece of land at the side, and other niggling bits what officers have said to us today, Chair. If I get a seconder.
We have a proposal. Is that a proposal, Gary?
It is,
Did
Chair,
it
yes.
defer for what reason?
It's defer what officers have been saying and the developers and community use and the land architectural.
Victoria?
Sorry, Chair. I'm not particularly clear what's being suggested here. What I think you may be grasping at is that officers are advising you that they don't feel that the harm has been justified, and it sounds as though you perhaps want to give the applicant an opportunity to justify it. But obviously, I don't want to be putting words into your mouth. But is that what you? Because you only just mentioned one of the three reasons for refusal there. Obviously, there's quite a lot to go at here, so members will need to be, really thinking about what they want the officers to do in the interim. Because if it's not sufficiently clear, you'll probably just end up coming back with this report without much meaningful change.
No, just come in,
Barbara.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, this is my concern. We just don't have the information because the developer has not provided it. And I really feel for the officers, they've got no choice but to sort of refuse the application because, I mean, yesterday was a perfect opportunity for the developer to come, show us the inside, show how it was going to be sort of organised so that we could make a better judgment. And the officers can only make a judgment on what they have been provided with. And if they're consistently sort of refuse the information for whatever reason, I mean, sort of, we know planning takes time. It seems to me sort of the onus is on the developer to produce the required information. Otherwise, it's just sort of seen as leverage to get what they want with minimum output of themselves. So I'm really torn by this because it's a lovely building. We've got so many examples in Sheffield of buildings allowed to decay. And I really sympathise with that. It's a perfect situation to be developed for residential community use or anything in between. But the officers have asked for information and they've got nothing. And if the refusal will then encourage the developer to come back with this, then to me, that is a way forward because it's a message that we want it used, but it's got to be, they've got to show us exactly what they want to do with it and why it works, and they're not doing that at the moment. Got so many questions that could have been resolved yesterday. Thank you. It's a rant, really concern.
It looks like we've moved from questions to comments. So, Peter.
Well, just to say it, clearly the people who spoke, the objectors, want to save the building, and they've got an idea to save the building. The officers want to save the building. Both think they can allow residential. So in between there must be some solution without just saying no, which that seems to be our alternative, no, and go back and think again. But they obviously have ideas. The members from the community, they're keen. There appears to be acceptable solution is some residential. It's fitting it all in, and I just don't know whether just clear saying no now loses the whole thing, or whether we should say go back and have another think and come back in a couple of months or whatever, 3 months, with something that would fit the officers' ideas of what is acceptable and what's fundable. It's all right saying community, but I've been struggled with the community. We've raised 100 grand now, and we've still only just got a new roof on it. So it's, once you go, it's not that simple. It's got to be funded, whatever we kick them back to look at. And that's the dilemma, I guess, the bidders have, as we have. They've got to get the thing funded. Residential is one clear way of bringing in income that saves the building. Now, it just seems to me that somewhere in the middle of there is a solution, but I don't know.
Chair, I don't know whether members would find it useful just for me to reiterate what paragraph 201B says, is that what the applicant needs to demonstrate if it is substantial harm is that there's no viable use of the heritage asset itself can be found in the medium term, though through appropriate marketing that will enable its conservation. So in respect of that, what officers would require is to see that there's been some marketing of the property at a value that they think is appropriate for alternative uses that will enable its conservation. So that is, you may see it as an administrative or bureaucratic box to be ticked, but that is one example of something that could happen, that would happen in the future, that would enable potentially paragraph 201 to be complied with. Thank you.
Chris.
Yeah, just following up on that point, Chair, I think that is one aspect of it that would need some more time, because unless that marketing's already taken place and is all kind of boxed up and ready to be submitted to us, then there's a time period needed for that to be undertaken. And as I say, just a reminder that we have to, that paragraph requires us to either be convinced that the public benefits outweigh the harm, or all those criteria have been met. So that criteria would need to be met. Just in general, in terms of the dealing with the application now or requiring kind of more information, there's 2 points on that. We are required to deal with applications in as timely a fashion as we can. The application has been in since the back end of last year, so it's a good 6 months old now, 6-7 months old, and really ought to be determined by now, which is where we got to. We'd asked for information for a number of months, and it hadn't been provided in a timely manner, so we felt we had to make this recommendation. The second aspect is that were an application to be resubmitted within 12 months following the decision, that could be done without any application fee for the applicant. So it would be a resubmission with knowledge of the issues that have been raised, very much kind of been formalised, that they could come back with. My only concern about a deferral to allow them to do that is that I think there's a lot of work to be done, and it would be several months before we're back, which I don't think is in anybody's interest particularly, given that the opportunity is there for a resubmission that doesn't have a fee attached to it.
Thanks, Chris. Bernard.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I feel very frustrated with this because this format of meetings doesn't allow us to have a conversation, as it were, with people that come in from the community with themselves and have some discussion there. So it doesn't permit that. So I would like to see, is there a way of having the community itself, for example, the organisation that Laura has come along representing today, with it, working alongside a developer to come up with a plan, with a process in order to produce something that's suitable for everybody. I don't, it's a question. I don't know the answer. Is that possible?
Could you ask a question, Chair?
I want an answer.
RPPIY, or the developer?
I want an answer.
Influence you think?
Oh, sorry.
Chair, I think, to be fair to the community and the developer, they seem to be in agreement in any event in terms of what they want from the outcome of the application, and other than encouraging community engagement, which we do with applicants, we're not in a position to force that upon them.
Thanks, Chris. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. I think, thanks to the comments Chris has made, well, the last two sets of comments, and are very helpful. We now know that if we do refuse this application today, that provided the developer comes back within 12 months, they can submit a fresh application for free. And I think if we as a committee can give a steer and say that we would really like to see this building developed and restored with as much of the internal fabric as is practically possible be restored, and that there is a proper the appropriate archaeological survey done to the grounds, that we would look on this application sympathetically when it comes back. So I'm going to propose that today we refuse this application, but on the basis that we are hoping that it will come back and there will be a way forward for us to approve. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Mike. Tony?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In light of shortage of accommodation and what the government are proposing and what we're always under pressure on, would the tilted balance come into play here?
Chair, the tilted balance, or paragraph 11 relates to tilted balance, but I haven't got the actual wording in front of me, but the tilted balance, there's a section of paragraph 11 which, if you like, sets aside the tilted balance if there is considered to be significant harm to, such as a heritage asset or the green belt or other protected areas within the MPPF. So the principle is there throughout the report, but it's not applied because of the impact on the listed building. It sets aside the tilted balance.
Roger?
Right. I've nothing extra to say other than I want to support what Mike said, because I thought he put it very articulately. And we do. He's quite right. I'm sure we all want to see this building in use. And if those plans are put forward in a way that are acceptable, I'm sure that we'd be happy to pass them. So under the circumstances that we're faced with, I think that I'm going to support what Councillor Mike Chaplin has said. Thank you.
Are you seconding that, Roger?
Is it? Was that a proposal?
I've proposed it, so yeah.
Yeah, it's a recommendation.
Chair, just in terms of the process and the Constitution does say that what should happen is a vote on the officer recommendation. I would ask that members consider that it would be reasonable that proposed and seconded motion is to go ahead with that vote on the officer recommendation. But should it be won, it be minuted that members do want to look forward to seeing another application in the future that deals with the reasons for refusal. Thank you, Chair.
So I think we go to the vote then. So, Bernard?
Sorry, Chair. Just in respect of that motion and proposal, just need to have that voted on before you move on to the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Right. So can we have a show of hands on Mike and... Yeah. Thank you very much. Now we'll move to the officer recommendation vote. Bernard?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what I'm not absolutely clear what I'm voting on. Can I get some guidance? Because I really want this to happen. I really want that. I've seen some gorgeous buildings in the city that have been, have been remodelled inside. Yeah, it's not ideal, but we don't live in the past. We live now. And I just want that to happen. So I'd like some guidance as to how I should vote on this.
Chair, just to reflect what's currently happened is we've had a proposal and a second to that if the officer's recommendation to refuse for those 3 reasons is one, it should be minuted that committee looks forward to seeing a further application that deals with the reasons for refusal. So with that in mind, this vote is still for the officer recommendation, which is to refuse for the 3 reasons set out in the report. If you're not able to support the officer recommendation, then you should vote against the officer recommendation. Thank you.
Have you got a comment, Mike?
Yes, I mean, both Roger and I have proposed and seconded this in the spirit that we are hopeful that a fresh application will come back within 12 months, which means that the applicants won't have to pay for that. But it's on the understanding that they address our concerns over the internal heritage of the building, all the fabric there and how that can be best dealt with, but also the outside grounds where it is believed that there is archaeological material in the grounds that needs an archaeological survey to establish the extent of that. And that would help inform if and how much should be given over to car parking space, if at all.
My understanding on that, Mike, is that you proposed, Roger seconded, and we voted on it, and that was passed. And that, yeah, we passed on your, so now we're just voting on officer recommendation, whether, we accept the refusal or not. So that's where we are now, and your proposal is there. Okay, so we start again.
I'm sorry. I want to
Bernie,
make sure...
you're voting for the officer recommendation, whether it's to refuse or not refuse.
I support the officers recommended as amended.
Thank
Is that what we need?
Peter.
Thank you.
Support officer recommendation, Chair, as amended.
Gary?
Yes, Chair, support it.
Tony?
Support the offer recommendation as amended.
Irving?
Support officer recommendation as amended. Thank you.
Mike?
For the recommendation as amended.
Glynis?
Supporting the recommendation as amended.
Support the recommendation as amended. Thank you.
Barbara?
Support recommendation as amended.
And Cliff?
Support the recommendation as amended.
Right, thank you, that is passed.
Yeah, can we just clear off the list of building consent matters as well, please?
I'm told we need to take a vote on item 8C, which is the second part of this application. Mike?
Chair, I'm happy to take advice from Victoria. I assume having voted in the way we have before, we are required to accept the officer recommendation to refuse the LBC.
Obviously, it wouldn't be go against any common sense to find a contrary reason, a contrary outcome, really. But just for the purposes of this, we do have 2 applications before us, and obviously in the interest of consistent decision making, I'd suggest that it would be reasonable to continue along the same vein. Thank you.
On item 8C, we go to a vote. Bernard?
So I support the recommendation as amended.
Peter?
Support, Chair.
Gary?
Yes, Chair, support.
Tony?
Support, Chair.
Irving?
Support, Chair.
Mike?
Support, Chair.
Glynis?
Support, Chair.
Yeah.
Roger?
Say again. Support, Chair.
Barbara?
Support, Chair.
Cliff?
Support, Chair.
And that was passed, thank you. Yeah. Item 9, record of planning appeals, submissions and decisions. Anything to bring up?
There's nothing I was going to draw out, it's just for information, unless anyone has any questions, Chair.
Mike?
Yeah, just seems to be a higher number of appeals that the planning inspector overruled officer decisions on. And I think they were officer decisions, not decisions we'd made at committee. If we could have a bit of clarification on what we think's going on there.
No?
I don't think there's anything going on. I think it's unusual that I think there were five dismissed and 3 allowed on this occasion. And I think it probably just represents the very high number of appeals actually we've been dealing with recently. So I don't think there's anything untoward going on.
Yeah. Right. Date and time of next meeting.
Sorry, could I ask a question? I know it's annoying. But could we have a briefing at some point on the responsibilities of this committee around highways? Because we're the Planning and Highways Committee and we never have anything about highways in this, comes to this committee.
Well said, that man.
Yeah, I mean, as you just said, we occasionally get footpath orders for highways, and that's about all we get. We have an officer here to advise on that.
Feed it back.
Mike and I can probably feed it back as well.
We'll feed that back.
Next meeting is 15th of August, 2023 at 2 p.m. Thank you, members.